Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. Hope you're having a great morning. It's a great morning to be in DC. The weather is beautiful. We lucked out. It would have been very, very hot, I think. I'm just setting my timer. So it's really a pleasure for me to talk to such a sophisticated and experienced audience about this area. And some of what I'm going to do is obviously going to be a little bit of a touch point review just so we're all on the same page. But what I'm hoping to do is really share with you, what my thoughts are as a clinical researcher and now also involved with the CTSA program on what some of the core features and promises of community engaged research are. The types of partnerships that I think we are all considering, but is an expansion from, I think, years. This has been an evolution, and just talk about that evolution. I'd like to illustrate with the experience of my own as a clinical researcher working and partnering with the community, and talk a little bit about some of the opportunities but also the challenges involved there. And I'm hoping that that helps to set the stage for a discussion about the next frontier and some key kind of challenges and opportunities and questions that we can start to answer. So as we know, this is preaching to the choir, the community engaged research features. Really, this is not just a single methodology, but it's a whole approach and a holistic approach towards how do we think about research, with the overall goal being that how do we make discoveries that often have been demonstrated in some form or other more relevant? How do we make sure that the promise of that research actually gets embedded into our community, taken up, sustained, and has a real lasting and important impact? And to do that, we all know that partnerships are a key piece. We're moving beyond that phase where researchers really come up with the ideas in a bubble, and that we think that magically the outcomes are going to manifest in the community. We now know, after years and years and years, that doesn't happen. And we're faced with how do we make that promise of getting these discoveries into the community long-term with a real lasting impact. How do we make that happen? And another core piece of this is recognizing the strength of the community and the individuals who are actually going to utilize or take advantage of the research. This is who's the end, where's the end game, and how will it be taken up? And then I think really importantly, we've talked, one of the earlier speakers talked about disparities. And I think the principles that really kind of also weave in that in the process of doing research are transparency, equity, respect, and fairness. And that is in each phase of the scientific flow, from preclinical studies to clinical studies to moving it into the population, but even just the process of how we go about the research, asking the questions, developing the research protocols, conducting the research, and getting the message out there, and then making sure that we get some return on that investment. And I think so I think these are the promises that we can develop more transparent and trustworthy research. We keep talking about mistrust and the divide between academia and community. How are we going to bridge that? How are we going to finally create a transparent and trustworthy community? This is, truly, I think, an underpinning crux of the partnership, and how we're beginning to think about evolving our relationships. How do we achieve greater inclusion and ownership in the research by all of the stakeholders? How do we enhance the relevancy of the research and the scope of the research to achieve the greatest impact? And again, I call this a sort of a sustainability problem. We really want to figure out how do we take what we're doing, we're not there yet, and get it sustained in society for improved health. That is the goal. So the partners, we talk about the community, and then we also talk about stakeholders, and I actually think they're one and the same. When we ask, well, who are the community members? I actually wanted to raise my hand. I'm a community member too. We're all part of the community, right? In order to really accomplish this thing, we've got to pull everybody to the table, and we all are part of the community. And I think that bigger you know, that we're beginning to broaden that. We're seeing it broaden and broaden and broaden, and I'm delighted by that. And I think it's, you know, it's wonderful that we're pulling these ideas of stakeholder and community together, because I think we're all stakeholders, and the more that we realize we all have a part to pull, the greater the return on the investment will be. I think everybody in the room here knows the principles, you know, joint development of ideas and plans, inclusion from the beginning with all the partners. This is arguably one of the most difficult, challenging things to do, because this truly requires relationships to be in place, and they can't be thrown together 3 weeks before the grant proposal goes in, or even sometimes a year before it goes in. Really, we need long-standing partnerships with trust that are there, that we build off of over time to develop relevant ideas. How do we ensure that all the partners are engaged, feel valued, and perceive a return on the investment? There's so many inflection points on this issue. For example, when we put together grant proposals, I always struggle in my mind. I, as a researcher, are putting in a % effort on that grant. Okay, I'm getting paid substantially to do this research. And then I want my community partner to come in and volunteer their time, or, I mean, I don't want them to, but the paradigm we've been operating in is that the community is just going to jump right on in, see the return on the investment, and want to do the research with us because, oh, it's of such great value. There's just so many fundamental imbalances in that paradigm that I think we really have got to work hard to continue to overcome that. And understand what's that return on investment. There's a short-term return, there's an intermediate return, and then there's the long-term returns. And not everybody is motivated by the long-term returns about, okay, health will be better in 20 years if we do this today. There are real, you know, concrete implications of engagement research. Your time, your organization's time. And why is one organization's time valued more so than another organization's time? We've really got to overcome these real practical challenges. So I'm talking about, obviously, financing of research and the return, immediate returns on investment, in addition to these longer-term investments that I think everybody's interested in. So I've got Sharon, the direct and less direct, because I think when we talk about improving health of the community and the society, that's our goal. That's the important vision we all should be after. But that is a little bit indirect. You know, it takes a long time. We're talking a 20, 30, 50-year vision. We've got to talk about also the more close, shorter-term visions. What's really meaningful to all the partners? And I said about the longitudinal trusting relationships. I think we all know that. I don't know. This pre-work, which is that where we work off of established relationships and we develop ideas over time, I think is really, really important. You know, the ideas being shared by multiple stakeholders. I can't mention the number of times that I've had an idea and it's been changed substantially for the better when I include as many people in those ideas as possible. And you know, these ideas actually need time to solidify. You know, it's unfortunate the way grant applications come, and we have also requests for applications, so they're ideas of priority. But we often don't have the time it takes to really marinate on those ideas and make them really relevant and even more applicable. There are a lot of implications for process. I wanted to quickly share with you my own experience with a study called the ACT study that we've just recently completed in Baltimore, and some here in the room actually have been a part of this process. And this was part of a broader one of the, I'm going to forget the NHLBI, they had a series of CPHHD, big program projects, community engaged program projects to improve cardiovascular health. And we, the Hopkins Center for Cardiovascular Health Disparities led by Dr. Lisa Cooper, or Eliminate Cardiovascular Health Disparities, had 3 programs in it. And I ran one project called the ACT study. And the idea of the ACT study was to study tailored interventions to improve blood pressure control among urban African Americans. And we wanted to use a community-based participatory research approach within the context of this question. And we wanted to engage community partners throughout the process of our research question. And of course, we started off with some preliminary engagement about the question before we put in a grant application. And then we ended up fortunate to get funded. But then we decided, all right, well, we really want to take this on in the context of our NHLBI funding, and we had a planning phase, and then we had a clinical trial phase. And what I want to talk about is a little bit about the planning phase and what went into the planning phase, because it ended up really blowing my mind as a more junior investigator as to what it would take to really do this the right way, and has really helped shape my thinking about how we move the field even further forward and what kind of investment. We built on years of relationships that had been built by many others that preceded me in the community in Baltimore. And of course, there was a community advisory board, and there were individuals that we reached out to at all levels of stakeholders. And what we did was we began to talk about, here's our funded idea. And let's look at our funded idea, and what do we need to do to tailor this so that it works for patients in an inner city Baltimore clinic. And we had a clinical trial proposed. And we had a little pre-work where it was informed by community members, and we had decided we were going to randomly study the effect of an intervention in one of the Baltimore clinics to improve hypertension control among urban African Americans, bundling together 3 interventions that actually had previously been tested in other studies, but we were looking to how do we make these can they be effective in this community, and can we get a sustained effect, which we've never been able to get with hypertension control, the same question that we keep confronting time and time again through NHLBI studies. So this was our original study design. And so we had this community engaged stakeholder process, and we wanted to really engage. So we took, actually, I think it was about 1.5 years of engagement we actually took on in the context of NHLBI funding. And believe me, there were times where we were wondering, is this trial going to actually ever get off the ground? Because here it was, we were funded, we really need to get this. But we really wanted to do a lot of engagement with multiple stakeholders in the clinic, patients, families, the community, to try to really tailor this intervention. And what we ended up doing was adapting our trial substantially. So that there was increased emphasis on connecting patients to their own community resources, increased emphasis on meeting patient and family needs in that clinic that were directly tailored to what the patients told us in focus groups and their family members in focus groups. We wanted to emphasize positive community attributes to really help empower the community a bit, not just the local community there of patients being seen in that clinic, but also the surrounding community. And then focusing on some key needs like health literacy and other needs that we had. It wasn't just health literacy, there were also socioeconomic needs that we addressed, and a variety of needs. So we went from, and I'm simplifying this substantially, this type of an intervention to this. What happened is that the community members and the patients and families told us we were going to give half of the patients, they were going to be seen by a community health worker, they were going to get communications training, they were going to be trained on self-management for their blood pressure, and they were all going to get blood pressure cuffs in one group, and the other group was going to get usual care. And what we found were that the community and the patients said, no, everybody should get a community health worker and a blood pressure cuff. Okay? No usual care arm. And then let's look at, we asked also the clinic and payers. Well, the clinic and payers wanted to know, well, what's the additional benefit of the communications training beyond a community health or the blood pressure cuff? What's the additional benefit of self-management training? So we ended up with an entirely different study design, which had real implications actually on how we ran the study, the cost of the study, and how we were, the whole thing. But I think this really illustrates how when you get engagement, what really happens to research. And we still were able to maintain a very rigorous design, a very relevant question, but our hope is that the research would lead to more sustainability. And we've had some success in that arena, actually. Luckily, we're just now, not luckily, fortunately, but we're just now writing up those findings. What was the process? We actually tried to track these. What were the resources? 84 meetings over a 2-year period, 91 hours of direct time invested in terms of meetings, face-to-faces, following focus groups, following clinic members around, meeting with community members, getting all kinds of input. Time spent, additional time, which we didn't even really know how to capture, preparing for meetings, travel, analysis, informal conversations. This is how we broke it down. Community advisory board meetings, investigator meetings where patients and community members were there, a community-based community health worker consultant from the community helping us design our protocols, sitting down with our protocols, hours of this person's time to do that. Meetings with graphic artists and community members, meetings with patients and families, practice staff, leaders from clinic programs, all kinds of stakeholders. This is the kind of engagement that we're not accustomed to paying for through our traditional clinical research funding mechanisms. But this is what is required to enhance the transparency and relevancy of our work. The lessons I learned from that, I've learned so far from that project, which continues on beyond the funding period, is that, of course, the partnerships enhanced the study relevance tremendously, but there were some risks that we had to be willing to take on with our design. We really had to be, there was a time period where we really struggled over changing a design that had already been approved by a study section, that had already been funded by NHLBI, and really going through and doing this. This was a little bit risky for us, and also the time engagement really put us, in a situation where we really had a lot to take care of in a short amount of time. It was rewarding and positive, and I think the process absolutely improved the potential for the relevancy and impactful study findings. But again, this is what we need to confront as clinical researchers, thinking about what are the time and resources that this whole process is going to take. And this is where I think, as we talk about, we've got several CTSAs here represented, core infrastructures that help support the intermediate or the in-between and the kind of pre-work that's needed to get the other funded research off the ground. These sustained infrastructures and funded are critically important to maintain and make more robust. We need more investment in this if we're going to have the kind of longitudinal relationships that and trust and engagement that we need. And here it is, it's just one blood pressure study, but there's myriad number of diseases and conditions that we're doing. And so we do need centralized platforms to help support this kind of engagement. Experience, I think, is actually an issue, in particular on sort of multiple stages. None of us as stakeholders actually has the ideal experience to work together yet in terms of research. Researchers don't have enough experience working with the community. The community has varied experiences. Researchers, different stakeholders have various exposures to research. So I think this idea of how do we really develop an experienced group of people to do this kind of engaged research is important. Trust, again, the age-old question, but I think only through this process of community engagement can we even begin to address these trust questions. We absolutely need to, as a research community, take on this approach to overcome the decades and legacy of mistrust that we have with the research community when it comes to the value for the community and other stakeholders, for the community stakeholders. I've talked about infrastructure and coordination, critically important. I'm happy to see that the CTSAs and NCATs are taking this on as a major initiative and pushing it forward. And PCORI as well, I think, has had a huge impact as well in terms of encouraging this and creating new funding structures for helping to support this process, but I think we can go further. And I might say another word about that in terms of how other government agencies might really get involved in terms of creating sustainability. When we only have PCORI and I don't want to say only, but when we have PCORI and NIH really taking the stride on doing the front end, when we talk about sustainability, what are some of the other organizations that need to come into play? HRSA, I mean, all of these other organizations need to be at the table to figure out how they're going to pick up the ball and take it beyond T4 to full-blown sustainability. How do we ensure everybody perceives a return on the investment? Again, the holistic idea of we're improving health is important, but everybody needs to feel the tangible benefits of the work. So I'm going to leave off, I'm hoping I'm on time, I think I am, I put my alarm on, that, how do we build, and with 4 questions I think can help guiding for the next frontier. How do we build and maintain the resilience of enduring partnerships and platforms to extend beyond individual investigators, projects, or programs? How do we really develop the kinds of infrastructures we need to maintain this as a field and invest in that. What resources and revisions to traditional funding mechanisms are needed to fully realize the promise of community-engaged research? So for that, I'm seeing that, PCORI put in place, and I've seen NIH begin to put in some earlier sort of planning types of grants, that kind of thinking. But then what about and then we have our projects. What about at the other end? How do we maintain that sustainability? What are the best mechanisms to build enhanced community and researcher engagement capacity? How do we train the next generation of stakeholders, including researchers and all the stakeholders in the community, to work together? How can we develop some sort of team-based mentoring to build a pipeline of partners, community and academic? Are there new ways to train the next generation and think about the next generation? Longitudinal mentoring opportunities. We need to have, a robust group of folks that are willing to take this to the next phase. And then I think the biggest issue is really how do we tackle the sustainability problem? The biggest gap I see is that we've got a lot of work, we've got some investment here at the front end, but how are we going to get these discoveries into practice? We've got to come up with mechanisms to make that happen so that, and it involves policy, pulling in different disciplines that we still haven't pulled in yet robustly. So those are the questions I'm going to leave with. I think we all know this is a specialized approach to rigorous science, and I think I'm just so pleased to see we're finally at the point where everybody recognizes, hey, this is rigorous science. So now that we're there, how are we going to make sure that we're going to really help realize the benefits? I think there are lots of exciting opportunities and new methods that we can develop to move the field forward. Are we going to? Okay.
So how many?
Excuse me? Two more. You got this is what
Thanks very much for being here. Thanks to Consuelo for having me. This is great to follow Ebony because she really teed up a lot of the principles and concepts. I think that my work, which has been more on the street, I'm not an academic. I don't have the credentials of the other panelists, but I bring, I think, a more ground-up sort of perspective that I think will be helpful. So my two kids were diagnosed in 1994, as many of my friends, colleagues, and acquaintances here know, with something called pseudoxanthoma elasticum, which thrust me into this community. Just yesterday I was with a colleague and I realized what it feels like to me all the time, and I think I can actually stop doing it, so this may be even my first day of not doing it, is I feel like Dory in the movie Dory or Nemo speaking whale. That I didn't know how to speak whale when my kids got diagnosed, and I had to pretend that I knew how to speak whale to get anything done on a disease that nobody really cared about, which is true of a lot of diseases that are rare, but also true about common conditions as well. I don't think we in the rare disease community have anything all that different than in the common. So we stepped across the line and entered this community that we didn't know anything about. First of all, it really wasn't the community. And one of the first things I realized is the only way I was going to get indoors, it seemed, is to carry somebody else's briefcase. And I literally was told, even after I had built blood and tissue banks and done all kinds of things on my own from kind of the grassroots garage citizen science kind of perspective, someone at NIH said to me, you can come to the meeting if you carry my briefcase. That was kind of shocking to me that, we wouldn't have the same kind of credibility just being a parent to come into the room. So with my husband, and he says this is evidence of our neuroses and not any kind of achievement, we put together all kinds of things from the ground up. And this was 1993, 94, 95. So it's the years before the internet was really common. It's the years before there was any pathway to ordinary people building blood and tissue banks, registries, epidemiological studies, putting together a diagnostic test, bringing it to FDA for approval, doing clinical trials, et cetera. So again, all in just one small disease, only with 4,000 people, not a big deal in some ways, in other ways pretty tough. But what dawned on us really early on was that it was really silly to do this for one condition, and also to keep breaking these same boundaries that weren't broken the next time we went back. The next time we went back, in 1999 and in 2005 was, you can come in the room if you carry my briefcase. So we realized that a lot more had to be done, and we wanted to be in the business of
really moving to whole communities and making all of us participants, because I think Ebony's absolutely right. We reserve words like community, and Consuelo was one of my early teachers in this as well, that all of us are in this game in one way or another who want to be, and there are some who don't yet know they want to be, so we really want to keep this very open. I think we want to make sure that we understand what partnership means, and we heard President Obama say this, whatever year that was now, boy, it's like 2 years ago in February in the White House. He invited a bunch of us together and said, you're going to be partners now. The president said that when he announced the Precision Medicine Initiative. We don't want to be patients. We're not patient. When we have chronic conditions, we don't want to be considered a patient all the time, right? That's sitting on the table with a Johnny on in a real asymmetry kind of situation. We also don't want to be just at the table. We want to be planning the meal. We want to say where we're going to have it. We want to say who we're going to invite to the meal. So when you say to us, you can have a seat at the table, which they finally did, I didn't have to carry the briefcase anymore, that still was not enough. We really need to be in the game there. This has to be frictionless, and I think Ebony said a lot of this as well. We really have to figure out how do we do this in communities. It strikes me, and again, this is back to my trying to speak whale, as long as we keep trying to speak whale, we're not going to be able to get to the communities, to the places we need to be, and have this actually come out of the community. We keep using this academic medical model that comes in like a helicopter science and doesn't really engage people. And the kinds of commitments that we need to make aren't there except in projects like she described. So how do we do that? And I do think sustainability is a huge thing. This has to be where we work and where we play. We all know that we figure out how to use flip phones, cell phones, texting, whatever we need to use in whatever communities across America and the world, if they're important to us. If a clinical trial is 50 miles away and you have to go on a day that you're supposed to be with your family or take off from work, you're not going to do it. So we have to figure that out. It has to be relevant. It has to have value for the community. Even in the rare condition that I study with my kids, what I realized right away is researchers weren't studying things that were people. They were studying stuff that would get them the next grant, that would get them the next paper, that would get them the next promotion. That is important because I want them to get papers and money and all that. But we have to figure out ways that that actually meets my need, the needs of people in communities. Where's the value? What's the question? I'm really enjoying working with PCORnet, which is funded by PCORI for that reason, because we are consistently saying these have to be questions that are answering the needs of the community, and if they're not, we're not going to be playing with them. The results of these things have to be visible, because I think, again, lots of times these projects are done and nothing is given back to the community. There should be continual communication with communities, and especially once results are done. And then I like to solve my problems while I solve your problems, because then we're all going to play, right? So if I can solve the problem of a researcher needing to get the next grant, the next promotion, and have him or her work on the problem that I care about, I think that's a win-win. It's hard to do that all the time and to find that kind of alignment. And then I think this is beyond advocates and advocacy to affinity. And what I'm saying there is, so I come out of the advocacy community, disease support groups, disease advocacy groups. I think that's a dying realm, and I'm the head of Genetic Alliance, which is the head of all kinds of organizations like that. But I do think that we are now discovering affinities. And because of the electronic ways we can interact with each other and the community ways and the neighborhood ways, we know that we like to go to church together or temple together. We know we like to all go to the same pharmacy together. We know that we might like the same baseball team in the afternoon on a Sunday in the neighborhood. Those things mean we have affinities with others that are almost more important than whether or not I have cystic fibrosis or sickle cell or cardiovascular disease or whatever else. So I think we need to start to work on our affinities and not so much on our advocacy. And we also don't want to leave this to advocates who start to act like the man or the institution, because I think that's happening as well. I think a lot of advocacy organizations strive to be speaking whale, getting it big, and make the organization more important than the people. I think we really want to watch our language. And again, even as I came into this world, I was so surprised that lots of times people said, we're going to let you do blah, blah, blah. It's like, what do you mean, let us? We already have the permission, the power, the right to have these things. What is this language? And I keep hearing it. I know no one means anything by it, and in fact, they're feeling enlightened and engaged and participatory themselves. But I myself have to watch my language, that it is not letting somebody do something. It really is being together in this. Again, just yesterday, talking to a colleague from PCORnet, we're talking about lots of times we say, if only people would get engaged with their health. Every day, everyone is engaged with their health. Every day, everyone wakes up with a, a creaky joint or a not feeling so well or feeling bummed out. They're engaged. What we're doing is building barriers to make it really hard for them to feel like they have any power over that, where they do feel like they have power in lots of other parts of their lives. So we need to figure that out. There should be no having to give anyone permission. In fact, those of us, because now I'm on the other side of the line doing a lot of research, we are the ones who should be asking permission. May we be part of this community? May we do this? So we need to discover our shared and our divergent values. And I think we just need to be honest about that, because I think we do have divergent values sometimes. We do need to have something done that isn't in line with a community, and we need to be transparent about it. I also think, and this again, as everybody here knows this so well, and it's really bad that we're always preaching to our own choir, right? It's not consent, it's engagement. Consent is a transaction. It's just a back and forth of some kind of, just a moment. We really do want to get into the kind of deep engagement that I think we're talking about here. Engagement actually was and is part of something called Fair Information Practice Principles, which has a rubric that is assignable in a sense, and consent is part of that. It's one piece that was plucked out by the Office of Human Subjects Protection, which is another word we need to get rid of, and that needs to be re-embedded in this whole engagement process and in what is fair. And it's an evolving process, not a one-time sort of deal. So I'll just briefly mention a couple things that I did just mention, and Ebony mentioned as well, and so did Consuelo. So I'm part of PCORNet, which I think all of you know is the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute's project to network a whole bunch of clinical and people-powered kinds of entities to say, can we actually change essentially the mental model that we all come into this with and play this game very differently and take the risk of bringing people and people-driven science forward, answering the questions we need. So the vision, of course, is to create this large network. Now, there's lots of other networks, you know that as well, and I should say we're working really hard with the CTSAs, with the Precision Medicine Initiative, with the Cancer Moonshot. I'm actually involved formally with all of those and PCORNet, so that we don't reinvent wheels. Because I think one of the things that we, starting with ourselves and then Genetic Alliance and PCORNet, keep asking is, how are we building borders and boundaries? Because if there's a problem, it's actually me. I need to figure out how I'm going to be the change I want to see in the world, and once I do that, then there will be transformation. So even here we're saying, if we become insular, we're only going to be part of the problem as well. PCORNet has a lot of money, a lot of resources. One of the things we're asking is, and how much of that is spent on engagement? Because I think the dollar sign, as much as I don't want to be checking things off by money, I think Ebony's absolutely right. We keep saying, yes, we want robust engagement. Like, I want to see how much the Precision Medicine Initiative spends on engagement. I want to see how much PCORNet spends on engagement, because I think that's a really good sign of how much we value things as we move forward. I know in advocacy, we're asked to do everything all the time for $0, because we should, right? So I think we want to ask the same questions here. I'm part of something called PCORNet's Patient-Powered Research Networks. My group, CINA, which is a lot of groups, working to see how can we engage communities from the ground up. One of the projects we have, I'll just show you quickly, is essentially a platform to allow individuals to share their information when they want it, with whom they want it, and not to share it if they don't want to, so that can be very granular and very community-based. This is a window into Peer, which is the platform for engaging everyone responsibly. People have guides. They get to pick someone who sounds like them, is in the same station in life as them, looks like them, whatever, and understand how do they feel about sharing health information for research. And then they're given a dashboard of that particular guide, and they can choose what they want discovered, what they want to export and link to, how they want to be contacted, yes, no, and maybe, which is almost never in a system at all. These things allow individuals to make decisions and also to change them over the life course. If I have a child today born seemingly healthy, I probably won't share much. If that child starts to exhibit autistic symptoms in age 2, I might start to share a lot. One of the other tools we're using is something called Mosaic with our partners at the University of California, San Francisco, and this essentially does this work of saying, right from the beginning, people need to be saying, what do I need? How am I going to get it answered? And then in full public view, we build protocols. So scientists, clinicians, patients, policymakers, administrators work together in full public view, putting together the protocol, the methods, the aims, et cetera, for projects such that everybody else can comment on them. Everyone can see them. This is a completely transparent process, which really makes people nervous at first that somebody else is going to be looking at my stuff. And then what if I'm going to put this in as an NIH grant? Everybody's already seen it. Is it going to be stolen? Is my intellectual property going to be lost, et cetera? And so we're trying this experiment with the communities, leading the way such that then the researchers can contribute and start to feel more comfortable about this sort of openness and realize, actually, there are more projects than we have money for, so we're not going to have to worry about anybody stealing anybody's ideas. We believe this will build trust. We've done this in 2 communities so far. We're about to launch it in a 3rd. And the more that we can be transparent about it, we think the more we'll see really increased ability to work together. I think I'm going to sum up now. We really need to include the public and participants, and again, we need better language for this stuff in all stages of clinical research. I think we've already seen a whole bunch of these. A couple things that I'll just bring out is really talking about how we figure out how to build these studies such that people aren't, having a lumbar puncture on Christmas Eve or going 50 miles away and needing to have babysitters. How we're going to figure out how we're going to bring the voice of the public into, even all the way into drug making, drug prices, access, et cetera, and that we don't see these as separate things, but instead as emerging from the lived experience of people, and that will advance public trust. We did a very wonderful trustworthiness meeting for PCORNet in which we had the people be the speakers, the presenters, and the rest of us who are always the people trying to get communities to do things listened, and the kind of energy from that group was amazing in the sense that they really were able to say, here's the ways we need to be partnered with, and here's how this needs to grow up out of all of us. Ultimately, we're talking about culture change. We have to stop being paternalistic or maternalistic, that we need to be able to stop asking, stop saying we're letting somebody do this. We need to have partners in it. We need to set the passion of the people on fire. The people are already passionate and want to change the way we do medicine, the way we do research. They just don't find a way to do that. We need to support engagement. Again, we talked about sustainability. We need to build a trustworthy environment. When we built the trustworthiness meeting for PCORNet, at first the name was Public Trust in Research. And we realized we're saying, why don't the community trust us? That's the wrong question. It's how am I trustworthy or not trustworthy? And that not trustworthy is probably an even better place for me to spend time reflecting. We have to face our fears. This is super weird at first. It's as weird as me speaking whale. So I think we really need to figure out how are we going to go right up to the line, feel that fear in our gut. I don't want to share this because the guy next door is going to steal it and publish it. Or I don't want to do this because it's going to take me the next 10 days just talking to this one community. We have to face those fears and say, what is the fear from? How do I get past that fear? And that's a lot of actual inner work. The participants and the partners need to be accountable too. I think I've seen, especially in the advocacy community, advocates have tantrums such that they lock up some things they don't need to lock up. And I don't think we need to be in the tantrum mode anymore. Women chain themselves to the gates of Genentech to get Herceptin through. We're beyond the days of screaming and yelling and chaining to gates for the most part. I think we want to use ways that are much more partnership. And then we need to be very transparent with our mistakes. We need to apologize and move on. There is that wonderful saying that says, it can take you 20 years to build trust and 1 second to lose it. I think if in the process of that I say, I am sorry, I really did that wrong, then I think we're going to have an easier time of working together. This is my daughter and her wife. This is my son and his wife. And they, when they were 14 and 16, said to me, when you stop fighting our disease and start living with it authentically and really and understanding who we are and what we need, then you will be able to make the advances you seek. And their wisdom from all those years ago has carried with me all these years. And I think that we are really poised, finally, in America, at least, and across the globe, to work together. Thank you.
There. Was a nice collage.
Good morning. I bring you greetings from Al Richmond. I know when you saw the marketing material about this conference, you saw his face up front that he was going to be on this panel. And when I applied to attend the conference, I said, Al, you're supposed to be on the panel. How are you going to be in Geneva and be on the panel? So I'll deal with it. I'll deal with it. About 3 weeks ago, he said, well, Melvin, I need somebody to speak on my behalf. So, but I bring you greetings from Al. I think many of you know Al Richmond, who's the executive director with the Community Campus Partnership for Health. And he is currently, as I said, in Geneva with Dr. Giselle Corey-Smith of UNC and Misha Nguyen, who is a community partner. And they're spending a month-long thinking through and working around, as a resident program, around the issues of ethics. And it was funded by the Greenwald Foundation, focusing on crafting ethics guidelines and engagement for community research. And I think that's something that we really need. And he really believes that this work will advance the work around understanding ethics, ethical issues associated with engaging community around culture of communities, supporting capacity building, minimizing the harm, and undergirding the justice around communities. The title of my presentation, since I had to come up with one, was The Value of Time and Effort in Community Engagement. And in thinking through this title, I think it's very appropriate. And I've got a long list of things I'm supposed to talk about, but I appreciate being on a panel because a lot of the things that I think are important to discuss have already been mentioned, so I'll sort of wing it, as they say. So the Community Campus Partnership for Health is a national and international organization. This particular slide, I developed this slide before I knew what I was going to talk about. And there's another organization I work with. It's called Prime Collective, which stands for Partnership Research, Integration, Mentoring, and Education. And Bill Kearney, who was in the audience, is one of the managing partners with myself and Misha Nguyen. We have a poster that's coming up, so I want to get a chance to talk about it now, but I thought I had a big screen. Put it up there, okay? And we're doing consultations with academics around how to engage communities. So Community Campus Partnership for Health has been in operation for 2 decades. They're getting ready to celebrate their 20th anniversary. And the work, along with the partners, has bridged the connection between communities and campus across the country by supporting the development of scientific evidence that supports and upholds those engaged in the promotion of health and well-being in communities. Our view is that authentic partnership, so that's basically what I'm going to talk about, authentic partnership, and that was woven in all of the conversations that was going on, that we were having here, but I want to think of it in terms of what needs to be happening on the academic side to make sure that it's in place. And you're talking about engagement, and I'm a person that believes in naming it. And where is the money in the community? So it's not just about engaging the community and where's all these grants and programs providing money for community engagement, but is that money getting to the community and the people that should benefit from it? So our view of authentic partnerships are powerful, feasible, sustainable, modifiable mechanisms for improving population health, especially in historically marginalized and low resource communities. That's a party line that I had to put on the table, so I'm finished with that, and I want to talk a little bit about what this is all about. So I learned my life, I learned everything I know in life from baseball, okay? So when I started developing this, I thought of this movie in this title, and a lot of people use it in terms of, if you build it, they will come. And a lot of people are building a lot of things, and nobody's showing up. So, and I think it's very important, and if you go back and actually look at the movie, there are some engagement, community engagement, that made sure that these players came out of the cornfield. But I think it was very, very appropriate to start with this particular slide. And again, I also want to start with the definitions. When we talk about time, it's an indefinite continuous process of existence and events in the past, present, and future regarded as a whole. That's very important that when we talk about time, we're not talking about time intervals, we're talking about the whole continuum of time. But in terms of effort, the vigorous or determined attempt. This did not say a vigorous and determined product. It said attempt. This is a process in which we will continue to fail forward. And again, I actually borrowed this, and I work on another program, and one of the things they talk about is steal but give credit. So this is some work that Al that Al has been working on, and since he's in Geneva, I said, Al, you mind if I use this? I need to talk about this. He was a little reluctant, but so you will hear it again in more detail. But I like this particular concept because it speaks to the science and practice of place-based interventions as it's impacted by the intention intended to change. So the research and intervention is about intending to change, but generally it's about intending to change this one circle. But when we talk about community, how does changing that one circle also impact the larger community? Because ultimately we're talking about how do we improve the health and well-being of the entire community. The anchoring institutions, many of which you may be a part of, also has a role in this process. And that role has more to do with the fact that the work that you do has an impact on the social, economic, and well-being of communities. Whether intended or not, that is what's happening. And also in that process is the low resource communities. And they're always and most times victims of this process. But how do we make sure that all three of these balls get through this funnel so that we do have science and practice of place-based interventions? Okay, I really don't want to go there yet. It's when we talk about the intended positive social change in place-based interventions on the whole community, we need to look at who is not thriving. Who in this community is not thriving? And what do we need to do to address the institutional and systemic factors that keep the needle of on the same dial for generations of families? I always like to use the concept of healthy people 2000, healthy people 10, healthy people 20. We're still in the same place we were when we started, correct? Because there are some institutional and systems that need to be changed, and unless we really address those changes, we will not get there. Okay, simply put, community campus research partnerships actually must improve the outcomes among local low poverty and minority communities, and it depends on how evidence and impact is being defined. Who's defining? We talk about research. What does that payback really mean to that man that lives on the corner and trying to, take care of himself? So how does that translate in terms of translational research? How does it get there? And this goes back to the true function effort as reflected before, during, and after the party is over. Meaning when the money is gone, do you still have those relationships? So we need to change the narrative around the truly recognize and reconcile how much institutions contribute to the presence of these inequalities and also to the social climate around the physical, economic, political, emotional, and social violence is tolerated in our country today around Black, brown, and other groups that with limited social and political influence. In order to change this narrative, especially from the academic institutions, it must start in the board, in the trustees board. There must be a conversation at the higher level about how are you operating and influencing and perpetuating those social and systemic issues. I'd like to highlight also that CCPH has promoted what's called the regional forums. And how many of you have been involved in one of those regional forums? There are a number of people, oh, come on, raise your hands, raise your hands, raise your hands. There are a number of people involved in those forums. And that was when I really, even though I knew about Community Campus Partnership for Health, knew a lot about it, but I really got involved. And as a result, it established a series of meetings that were built by the community for the community with two major messages. One is that there needs to be communities of colors and low wealth communities sitting at the table and making decisions where those decisions are being made, and also developing the capacity and infrastructure to engage as equal researchers, either as PIs or as employees of the research. And I think that's been very helpful. So as we talk about the elements of authentic partnership, and again, when we talk about how, this is the how. And I've been, over the last year or so, sort of engrossed in this work around UNC has a clinical scholars program and of Robert Wood Johnson project, and we are a subcontractor to do work around community engagement. So it has created an opportunity for us to really look at this. You go on the website, you see these words, you see the definitions, but what do they really mean? So we've been spending a lot of time thinking through how do we make this, how do you take it off the paper and make it work? So there are essentially 12 guiding principles. I'm not going to read them. You can always go online. But also we have quality processes, meaningful outcomes, and transforming experience. These are very, very important tools. So if we look at the definition of authentic partnership, it's building upon identified strengths and assets, and also working to address needs and increasing capacity of all partners. And when I said that, I look up and look at Bill Kearney, because that's one of the things he really believes in, that there are assets in the community, and how do you connect with those assets, and how do you use them to progress the science that you're working on. As I say, I'm not going to read through these principles, but one of the things I want to pull out these three themes that I think are very important around the principles of partnership, and that is relationship building. I know when this meeting first started, when you started introducing the program and what we were going to talk about, relationships, you are renewing relationships and talking through relationships, but that is first and foremost in an element that you need to have there. And also developing structures and procedures, and also the distribution of power. I do a lot of work around race equity, and one of the instructors says the answer to every question is power. Okay, and you think about it, how does power look in the work that you're doing? Who has the power, and who has the issues around making decisions, and also who holds the purse strings? Quality processes. This is very important because you must be relationship focused, as I spoke before, open, honest, respectful, ethical. And these are some of the same things that were mentioned earlier. But also it must be shared learning, it must be mutual learning and shared outcomes. Meaningful outcomes. And when we look at meaningful outcomes, we're talking about tangible, we're talking about measurable, and we're talking about relevant. But to whom are these things? So how does community reflect it in those things? Transformative experience. One of the things that I can say that it's really come out of my involvement with CCPH is that it has been a transformative experience. But when you think about personal transformative experience, you're talking about it excludes self-reflection and heightened political awareness. When you think about institutional, you're talking about has it changed policies, changed systems. We look at community transformation. Has it built the capacity of the community? Do you have community members now, PIs in research. And when you look at it in terms of science and knowledge, it includes the knowledge is generated, deemed of value, and also significant to the community. So I'd like to leave you with 3 questions, and I noticed when I sent this slide out that I had 3 number 1. So all 3 of them are number 1, okay? and the first one is, what makes an authentic, equitable, and transformative partnership practical? Because in order to work with community, it must also be practical. How might this practical reality be sustained for everyone involved? And the third question is, how would you explain balance of power and resources in your partnership? And I ask that you take those 3 questions, think about them in terms of the work you're doing, and how should work be done differently. Thank you.